There has also been a halt to the reforms that set many developing countries on the emerging path in the first place. After Deng Xiaoping began experimenting with free market reform in the early 1980s, China went on to launch a big bang reform every 4 to 5 years, and each new opening, first to the private farming, then to private business, then to foreign business, sets off a new spurt of growth, but that circle has run its course. The unthinking faith in the hot growth stories of the last decade also ignores the high odds against success. Very few nations achieve long-term rapid growth. My own research shows that over the course of any given decade since 1950, on average, only 1/3 of emerging markets have been able to grow at an annual rate of 5% or more. Less than 1/4 have kept that pace up for 2 decades, and 1/10 for 3 decades. Just 6 countries, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, and Hong Kong, have maintained this rate of growth for 4 decades, and 2, South Korea and Taiwan, have done so for 5 decades. Indeed, in the last decade, except for China and India, all other countries that managed to keep up a 5% growth rate from Angola to Tanzania and Armenia to Tajikistan are new to this class. In many ways, the mortality rate of countries is as high as that of stocks. Only 4 companies, Procter & Gamble, General Electric, AT&T, and DuPont, have survived on the Dow Jones Index of the top 30 US industrial stocks since the 1960s. Few frontrunners stay in the lead for a decade, much less many decades, and identifying those few is an art rather than a science. Over the next few years, the new normal in emerging markets will be much like the old normal, dating back to the 1950s and 1960s, when growth was averaging around 5% and the rest was in its usual state of churn. The subsequent decades saw growth that was either unusually weak or unusually strong. In the 1980s and 1990s, growth in emerging markets averaged only 3.5%, weighed down by the collapse of the Soviet Union and serial financial crises in countries ranging from Mexico to Thailand to Russia. That was followed by the liquidity-fueled turbocharged boom of the last decade, which is now unraveling as the cost of funding growth rises. Once a financial cycle collapses, it can only rise again once memories of the collapse fade. Given the depths of the Great Recession of 2008, however, another debt binge is extremely unlikely in the next decade. The return of emerging market growth rates similar to those in the 1960s does not imply a revival of the image of the third world consisting of uniformly dark and backward nations at the bottom of the heap and destined to stay that way. During the 1950s and 1960s, the big emerging markets, China and India, were struggling to grow at all. Nations like Iran, Iraq, and Yemen put together a long string of strong growth, but those runs came to a violent halt with the outbreak of war, and these countries are now more closely associated with conflict than finance. The chaos overshadowed the takeoff in places like South Korea and Taiwan, both of which were largely unrecognized in their early years. While there are no reliable growth data on emerging markets from before 1950, the available evidence suggests that never have so many nations grown so fast for so long as they did in the last decade. Yet many analysts are still looking for this miracle of mass convergence to happen all over the globe. Meanwhile, scores of emerging nations have been emerging for many decades now. They have failed to gain any momentum for sustained growth, or their progress has begun to stall since they became middle-income countries. Malaysia and Thailand appear to be on course to emerge as rich nations until the chronic capitalism at the heart of those systems caused a financial meltdown in the crisis of 1998. Their growth have disappointed ever since. In the 1960s, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Burma were billed as the next ASEAN tigers. only to see their growth falter badly well before they could reach the middle class average income of about $4,000. Failure to sustain growth is the general rule, and that rule is likely to reassert itself in the coming decade. While India is widely touted as the next China, the odds are even that India could regress to the next Brazil. While in recent years Brazil has been widely touted as a rising regional superpower on the relevant fundamentals, Brazil is the anti-China, a nation that invested in the premature construction of welfare state rather than the roads and wireless networks of a modern industrial economy. Nations that have grown dependent on booming prices for raw materials such as oil and precious metals, namely Russia and Brazil, face a hard decade ahead. These countries had two of the world's top stock markets in the last decade. The next decade is full of bright spots, but you can't find them by looking back at the nation that got the most hype in the last decade and hope they will hit new high going forward. These stars are the breakout nations, by which I mean the nation that can sustain rapid growth, beating or at least matching high expectation and the average growth rates of their income class. For a nation like the Czech Republic in the income class of $20,000 and more, breaking out will mean 3 to 4% growth in GDP, while for China in the class of $5,000 and less, anything less than 6 to 7% will feel like a recession. One of the great economic stories of the century is largely overlooked because the European Union is widely spoofed as an open-air museum, and in late 2011 is in the throes of a severe debt crisis. But the EU is also a stabilizing model and still an inspiration for new members, particularly Poland and the Czech Republic, which are in that rare class of nations poised to break through and join the ranks of the rich elite. Not every little European Union member is a Greece.